As you know, there's now a vacancy on the Supreme Court. And if you turn in Monday at 9 o'clock, I think you're going to be extremely happy with the selection, right? And they're all great. They're all great.
He is always plugging a time slot. Good Lord. All right, they're all great, but could one choice actually pose a greater threat to the president than the others? Brand new reporting in the New York Times today lays bare Donald Trump's Kavanaugh conundrum. Judge Brett Kavanaugh, widely reported to be the frontrunner, once argued that a president could be impeached for lying. The reporting from today's New York Times details Kavanaugh's role in the independent counsel investigation conducted by Ken Starr into President Clinton. Quote, he once argued that President Bill Clinton could be impeached for lying to his staff and misleading the public, a broad definition of obstruction of justice that would be damaging if applied to President Trump in the Russia investigation. But now, if Trump passes over Kavanaugh, could the decision itself suggest that he's worried about what would happen if he were held to that standard? If he could be impeached for lying to his staff and misleading the public, the Trump Tower cover-up suddenly looks more ominous to this president. The panel's back to help us understand the stakes for the president and for the Mueller investigation if Trump picks after today's news and if he rejects Kavanaugh. Frank, you and I have been talking since this Supreme Court vacancy, it feels like 11 weeks ago, but I think it was only a few days ago, since this seat opened up, about the potential cases that could end up before the United States Supreme Court involving the Mueller investigation. Questions about whether or not you can indict a president, questions about obstruction of justice, questions about whether you can subpoena a president. It seems like this was put out there perhaps to maybe give the president pause, but it seems like there's equal peril in passing him over and maybe showing your hands in terms of your degree of concern about the obstruction of justice investigation itself.
So this is going to be one of the biggest decisions the president ever makes, as any president ever makes. But this is going to be personal for the president. And so what we're going to see happen here is he's going to pick the most personally expedient choice that he can. But there's a dilemma, as you said, because Kavanaugh, there's two separate conflicting issues here. One is he's come out with this research or these statements that seem to say you can be impeached under these circumstances, and so that seems to sway the president against selecting him. But in the same vein, Kavanaugh has previously come out with regard to impeachment, with regard to criminal charges, and said no, we shouldn't be filing criminal charges against the sitting president. So you've got impeachment and you've got criminal charges. So if the president thinks he's going to be impeached, he likely won't go with Kavanaugh. If he thinks he's facing criminal charges as well, he will go with Kavanaugh. And the thing is, you can't predict what a Supreme Court justice is going to do, but he must be tied up in knots on this right now.
Kimberly, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's the same. I mean, from the beginning, the fact that he did work for Kenneth Starr with that independent counsel investigation was a double-edged sword, just for the reasons that Frank pointed out. He was somebody, obviously, who believes in the ability of an independent counsel to do his or her job. So that cuts against the president's constant messaging that the special counsel investigation that's going on into him is nefarious in some way. Also, don't forget that Kavanaugh is the chief author of the Starr Report, which is filled with all sorts of salacious sexual details about Bill Clinton, which on the one hand, Trump may be happy to talk about, but on the other hand, it brings more attention to his own issues in that area. So there are a lot of conflicting things that will come out in a confirmation hearing that the president may like a lot and other things that he may not like at all.
Do you guys have any new reporting this afternoon?
Well, I think what's striking here is that this is the rollout of Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch was something this White House did really well.
Yeah.
And, for a White House staff that has faced a lot of dysfunction and has sort of tripped over its own feet a number of times, mostly caused by the president himself, that was something they held close to the vest. They were able to do so in secret. We knew the final two.
Yeah, the president was involved. I mean, to be fair, the president was involved in the process. It was run out of the White House counsel's office by Don McGahn. The president was read in at the end of the process.
Which perhaps prevented it from leaking. But that's something they were very happy with. And there's pressure to do that again.
Yeah.
They really want to get this choice right.
And Kavanaugh is McGahn's pick.
That's right. They know this is a big moment for the president and his legacy going forward, but they also want this to go really well in this primetime setting Monday night before he goes off to
I'm rooting for the guy that thinks he can be impeached for lying.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.